Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I am your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby. I'm joined today by Tim Houlihan, founder of BehaviorAlchemy and co-founder of the wonderful Behavioral Grooves podcast, a show I think you'll really enjoy if you enjoy this show. His work is focused on helping people live better lives through the practical application of behavioral science, and he's here today to talk about that and, of course, music, our shared passion. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks, Daniel. It's great to be here.
So you are looking very sharp for 8:30 in the morning, all decked out in your scarf and your cool glasses. So let's talk about you as the cool guy that you are. You're a musician. I'm looking, again, we're going to talk about all the visual stuff, which is great for an audio medium like a podcast. But I'm looking at you. You've got a poster of one of your CD releases behind you. You're a big guitar nut like me. Yep. So the first question, Tim, if you could embody your essence, your personality, your soul in one guitar, what kind of guitar would you be?
Wow.
Right?
Wow. That's okay. So that is a challenging question, and I'm not going to answer it with a brand, at least to start with. I think what I would like to have would be like a scientifically designed guitar for maximum emotion. That would be like, I don't know if that's too much of a contradiction, but I love science, but oh man, when it comes to music, I love emotion. So, and I like a guitar that's super expressive.
So an expressive guitar designed for maximum emotion. So Georgia Tech here in Atlanta every year does a new instruments showcase, and you have to come down sometime. They're wild. It's like stuff with lasers, giant instruments. It's a big engineering school, of course. And they design these new instruments and showcase them every year, and a winner is chosen. But we need to put it to the smart folks at Georgia Tech to design the Tim Houlihan signature edition, maximum emotion, maximum expressive-ness.
Have you ever do you walk away buying things, or are they just concepts?
No, it's real conceptual. It's nothing's for sale. It's just smart kids showing off their big brains and designing new instruments. What kind of guitar do you play? What's your favorite guitar? Pushing you to be more specific about a brand. What's your favorite guitar you have?
In the acoustic world, I think CF Martin has just done a fantastic job of just building a super consistent brand and I've got a couple of old Martins. One is a 1972 D18, and I've got a 1995 Custom, which is sort of like a, for guitar freaks, it's a herringbone pre-war style build, and they're just lovely. And I've got an old Alvarez Yeri that was made by Hakuto Yeri back in Japan in 1970, and it's an outstanding instrument as well. It's just huge, and it's like a cannon. So the acoustic world is really dominated by just big dreadnoughts. I love those. And in the electric world, I've had Strats and Tellys over the years, and right now, kind of my favorite is a big hollow body Gretsch.
I have three electric guitars. I have, an American Telecaster, Les Paul 59 style Les Paul. And then I have a Gretsch. I have a $500 Gretsch. So, it's like a fraction of the cost of the other two. And it's my favorite one. Oh. My cheapo Gretsch has the most beautiful sound, the most perfect neck, the best playability. Like, I don't know. Gretsch makes a gorgeous guitar. Yeah.
Well, and new technology. I think instruments just keep getting better and cheaper overall. It's just really, it's hard to fuss. Again, this is science, right? Science is working to build better instruments. So why not take advantage of it?
Absolutely. So let's get into the science. So you say that engagement, performance, and persuasion all begin with behavioral science. and that behavioral science begins with the unconscious. Now, you are a practical guy. You're a scientifically minded guy. For heaven's sakes, I asked you which guitar you were, and you said a guitar perfectly crafted by science for maximum emotionality, which sort of expresses to me who you are. And so I found this a little bit surprising because I find that when most people talk about and think about the unconscious, it feels kind of woo-woo, to use the scientific term. But I imagine you're talking about it in a more practical way here. So what does practical-minded, scientifically minded Tim mean? And how can we tap into these unconscious motivations?
Well, that's a great question. It really is, Daniel. And I want to start with the comment that Anurag Vaish, who is the founder of the Final Mile in India, has said repeatedly that we underestimate the value of the unconscious and the role of the unconscious in our behaviors. And so the more time that I spend with neuroscientists and with psychologists, the more clear it becomes that the unconscious is a huge driver of our behaviors. So, and because it's unconscious, we can't see it, we can't be aware of it, but what we can do is pay attention to our behaviors and to notice things in our behaviors, to be more aware of what we do, and that awareness could help us, give us some clues as to, well, what's going on in the unconscious? What are the things that we're actually not aware of? What are we rationalizing, not being rational at? So we can sort of take care. And then if we want to actually make changes to that, then it's hard to, I don't know how to change the unconscious, but I do know that we can change our environment and change the context in which we make decisions, in which we do things. Working out first thing in the morning is so hard, but I swear if I lay out every bit of workout clothing that I'm going to wear the night before right next to my bed, I am way more likely to do it than when I don't. And that tiny little trick cues me in a way that when I get up in the morning and I see those clothes laying there, it's like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So change the environment, and I think we change our behavior is oftentimes a good remedy.
So my personal behavioral hack for working out is drinking so much caffeine first thing in the morning that I just literally shake if I don't go work it all off. That's
it sounds like half torture.
I wish I were joking, sir. I'm not. Get up and just start pounding Diet Coke until I'm trembling, and then I have to go lift something heavy.
How long does it take before you're on the verge of bursting?
Oh, I'll be embarrassed if I tell people how much Diet Coke I drink as I sit here drinking more Diet Coke. But so I think when a lot of people think about tapping into the unconscious, it's something like deep introspection or hypnosis or years of therapy or something like that. And I think what you're proposing is a little bit more grounded than that. You're saying simply look at the things that you're doing and then sort of work backwards to figure out sort of what unconscious motivations might be behind it. Is that right?
Absolutely. And again, the rubric that I would use would be when am I rationalizing and when am I being rational? In other words, when is my agency, when are the things that I'm doing actually building on my best intentions rather than me sort of rationalizing that, well, that was just because of this or that because of, I just did this because of that particular situation or, blah, blah, blah. And that's rationalization. And I think the rationalization is the clue that, wait a minute, there was something happening unconsciously in that.
So this is a bit of a tautology, but I guess unconscious things are unconscious for a reason, right? I mean, these things operate beneath our awareness for a host of reasons, one of which is if they're brought to awareness, there's sometimes some cognitive dissonance because sometimes we push things down because if we bring them to our own awareness, we've either got to feel bad, we've either got to sort of deal with some unpleasant emotion about having to confront our own nonsense and irrationality, or else we've got to make behavioral changes. How do you push past that? Because the unconscious, again, it's pretty good at keeping this stuff beneath our awareness to sort of streamline our lives, even if these streamlined lives can lead us to sort of unfulfilled lives. So how do you push back the natural tendency of your mind to want to keep these things below deck?
The short answer is I don't know. I'm not sure. So I think that's a really great question. I believe I'm leaning in the direction based on things that I've read that we have to start with intentionality. We have to start with some desire, and desire and motivation and goals. They're all kind of closely related in this, but I think that when you get into motivation and goals, it starts to put too much weight on the concept. So if we can think about those things just as, well, what's my intention? What's my desire? What would I like to be? Well, how would I like to live my life? How would I like my relationships to be? What kind of decisions would really benefit me, not just now, but in the long term? And a little bit of intentionality, I think, could go a long way. That's just an idea.
So you've got that intentionality, which is sort of the North Star, if you will. Yeah. And then I like your rubric of rationalization versus rationality. So you can say, okay, if ABC is my aim, right? Like if this is what I'm being intentional about, is my behavior consistent or inconsistent with that? And then I think you've actually stumbled onto something quite brilliant there. And I'm a big fan of, maybe I'm just a simple-minded guy, I don't know. I'm a big fan of sort of mental lattice works, mental frameworks that have a lot of horsepower behind them. Dan Pink's Mastery, Autonomy, Purpose, I refer to a lot. Seligman's PERMA model, Cialdini's Persuasion, 6 Pillars of Persuasion. These are things I rely on a lot and find enter into my thinking and my work in practical ways. Your work is undergirded by a similar framework that's called the EAST framework. And this is a framework that was popularized by the UK Nudge team. And it stands for easy, attractive, social, and timely. Now, I think the listeners are going to get a lot of mileage out of this. So I want us to actually spend a moment with each of these, the EAST, and talk about them in a little more depth, because I think listeners, when they understand this framework, they'll see all kinds of applications, and it's really sort of industry agnostic. I mean, this is stuff that works for parenting. This is stuff that works in finance. Whatever behavior you're trying to shape, I think this is a powerful framework. So the first of these is easy. And you say that there are 3 keys to making something easy. What are those 3 keys?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump into that. But first, can I just say that I like your idea that this is industry non-specific. The EAST model is something that can be used both in a diagnostic framework and a design framework. Which is true of a lot of behavioral science elements, right? That we can use it to diagnose the problem, and then we can also use it to design a solution. And so I love it for that as well. So easy. I love easy because it's about harnessing defaults. That's the first aspect of it. In other words, what are we doing now? What's the culture of the company? What's the general vibe of the audience that we're trying to reach? What are the defaults? What are they normally doing? What are they doing now? Like, let's just start with what is the behavior that they're doing now. That's a great place to start. The second one is to reduce friction. To make things easy is to reduce the number of clicks that somebody has to go through, to reduce the number of steps, to reduce the number of the amount of paperwork and processes and things like that. Those are all friction reducers that allow us to get into those new behaviors. And then the last is to simplify messages. Our brain can only sustain so much cognitive load. And by reducing cognitive load by using, simple messaging really, really helps. Ikea, I think, did a wonderful job when they kind of came on this idea that we're just going to have these really simple pictures on how you put the furniture together. I think they've also lost it when they've varied when things actually get a little more tricky, that the pictures don't always give you enough information. And so I think that there's opportunities to make things easier by combining ideas rather than just excluding all words possible. So those are the three things I think.
So Ikea Furniture, hard to pronounce, easy to put together. So this is, so I want to spend just a minute with this. I think one of the most misunderstood principles in behavioral science, I think for the average behavioral science enthusiast, is this principle. And you talked about sort of meeting people where they're at and taking the behaviors that they're already engaged in and making them work to their advantage. This is the principle behind some of the most effective behavioral science interventions of all time. If you think about something like the Save More Tomorrow program, it's literally taking this human tendency to be sort of lazy, forgetful, status quo prone, and just baking it in a way that makes it work for a benefit and not to our detriment. So I think a lot of times when people read, they listen to your work, they read my work, they go, oh, well, the thing to do is to diagnose my behavioral biases and then just sort of fight like heck against them, sort of just white knuckle my way to greater rationality. And I think there's some powerful ways in which we can make irrationality work in our favor. And I think the easy button, if you will, is one of those. Tim, there's one of the things that I think some people find tricky about behavioral science is sometimes the findings seem to conflict. So we know that this easy principle is true, and it's sort of self-evidently true. Like you hear this and you go, yeah, like if you want to make if you want to get more of something, make it easy. But we also know through things like the IKEA effect. You brought up IKEA, so we'll run with it. We know through the IKEA effect that people were willing to pay up to 5 times as much for furniture that they put together versus furniture that someone else put together. So we know that easy matters and that easy yields more behavior. But we also know that in some cases, complicating a process a little bit can lead people to esteem it more highly. Is there any kind of direction you could give about when one principle applies versus the other, I guess?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with goal setting and motivation in corporate environments. And one of the things that sales leaders use as a tool to get people to sell more is sales incentives. And so the common belief among sales managers is let's just make it so easy that all the sales reps can participate. And regrettably, not all sales incentives are designed to actually fully engage all sales reps. Oftentimes, they're only engaging the top 20 or 35%, something like that. But when you actually do come up with something that can fully engage the entire sales force, then the question is, who is going to raise their hand and actually participate and actually engage? And one way to do that is to increase friction, to actually ask them to make a commitment to a goal that's based on their individual performance. And just the act of requiring the sales rep to go in and click a button that says, I'm engaged, this is my goal, that tiny amount of friction and that microscopic amount of time that it takes to look at 3 goal options based on, again, relevant to my performance, and then to click a button and say, this is my commitment, that is enough to get more like 50, 60, 70% of the sales reps engaged and more than 50% achieving at higher levels rather than 20 or 30%. So there's a really practical application that comes from when you feel like you want to engage people in a more meaningful way. IKEA does it. They want to engage people in building that furniture, that silly stuff. Boy, they want people to engage in it. So they add that friction. When you don't want people to engage in certain parts of things, like Shlomo Benartzi, talked to him recently about Save More Tomorrow. We don't want people to have to think about saving. We want that to be kind of automatic. They still have the choice. I'm not going to save or I am going to save. But by taking some of the friction out of that part of the decision, gets them more engaged. Does that help?
No, it's super helpful. And the next one we're going to talk about is attractive. And it seems to me that the attractiveness of the endeavor may have something to do with it as well. I'm jealous of a few business models, none more so than Build-A-Bear. So, as each of my kids is sort of aged into, wanting to do the Build-A-Bear thing, I take them there and I'm like, I'm paying whatever 175% of what a comparable stuffed animal costs for the privilege of assembling it myself. Like this is the most diabolically.
You're framing it wrong. That's, I mean, I get the framing, but right? Isn't that it, right?
Exactly. Well, and I even think about direct indexing in finance. It's like there's a level of complication, or socially responsible investing. Like there's a level of complication that's client driven and attractive, where you don't mind sort of the extra step or two that it takes to get it right. And make sure that your portfolio is constructed in a way that's consistent with your values. So let's talk about the attractive piece, because one of the things that I think is tough for many of the listeners of this podcast or work in finance, and this is one of these fields that aren't inherently attractive to most people. We know that money is very consistently the number one source of stress in people's lives. We have research out today that says that PPI is at 11%. Inflation's the number one fear. I read an article yesterday that said 85% of Americans are scared about inflation. We know that saving is perceived as a loss. We know that investing requires uncertainty and risk, and the human mind and body are not wired for any of these things. So it's self-evident to me why making something attractive is desirable. But how do we make something like finance that is so fear-inducing and triggers so much of our sort of primitive thinking? How do we make this sort of inherently unattractive thing more attractive?
Wow. Well, thanks for setting that up with such a bright, sunny day.
Look, man, it's early.
Well, with all of that framing, right, then the opposite can be true, right? That as Rory Sutherland says, the opposite of a good idea can be a good idea, and so when the industry is taking advantage of leveraging ethically, I'm just going to enforce that right up front, that when ethically taking advantage of framing for positive reasons, things like safety and security and recognition, when those aren't used from a fear perspective, but when they're used actually from a very positive perspective of really feeling good about what I'm doing and feeling good about not just today, but my future, I think that those are very positive messages, and that you can make something attractive by in some cases giving people sort of this is the right thing to do. It's not we humans don't want to do the right thing. We generally do. Yeah. But we need the right circumstances and the right context and the right environment to often move us to that. The decisions that I made about my financial future when I was 21 were certainly different than when I was 31 and I had kids, and when I was 41 and my kids started to grow older. The context matters, and I think that what behavioral scientists need to do is to really think about the messaging and the framing to appeal to what's happening. What are the defaults? Where are people at already? And to think about an attractiveness from this. You can do good for your space in life, for your demographic, for the kinds of goals and desires that you have. That's not going to reach everybody, but I do think that there's of course many ways of solving these issues. But I think attractiveness can come in terms of actually really positive ethical and positive framing.
So at Orion, we have a new technology we've baked in called Protect, Live, Dream, and it's really all about intentional framing around people's wealth. It's allocating a piece to a safety mental account, the protect account, because we've seen that when that happens, there's some evidence to suggest that people are dramatically less likely to go to cash and freak out when they have sort of an understood safety bucket. And we need an aspirational bucket, because we want to keep people focused on their dreams. And I really think that why, or that positive framing, is the yes that's bigger than the no of all the fear, right? The fear and that loss that we perceive when we save, and the fear that we experience when we invest. I believe it was Gilovich, I hope I'm not going to mess this up, but they had some research around, they asked people, could you save 20% of your income? And effectively everyone says no. Because saving is perceived as a present loss, and they ask people, could you live on 80% of your income? And they go, well, yeah, And so I think that sometimes the simplicity of something like an intentional frame, it's so simple that we fail to grasp how dramatically it can shift someone's thinking. So thank you for calling me on my own negative frame around how scary the industry is, and reminding us to sort of be positive in the way that we talk about these things. Now, Tim, the third piece is social. There's no shortage of conversation in finance about times in which social investing has gone awry, right? We've got manias, panics. We've got the famous shoe shine boys giving stock tips. We've got certain unnamed large fintech companies that are using social proof to drive up transactions and order flow. How can we use the social piece to help people herd in a good direction? How can we use social proof to help people make better decisions instead of worse decisions?
Well, if we could get to a point where we could understand an individual's reference networks and who are important in any given person's life. I'm thinking of Christina Bicchieri's work from the University of Pennsylvania, where she's discovering that just because you live in a small village doesn't mean that you actually care about your neighbor and what they do, but you care about your cousin who lives in actually another village. And if your cousin did something, that might be more influential for you. And so if we could actually understand an individual's reference networks, we could positively influence, well, guess what? These other people are doing things that are like you. I mean, O-Power with Bob Cialdini discovered early on that just letting people know what their neighbors are doing from a energy usage perspective helped first of all, help raise awareness of, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was using so much more energy than my neighbors. And then it kind of brought up that social thing of, I don't want to be the guy on the block that's using the most energy, so I'm going to pull back. And the early studies certainly showed reductions in energy usage. So there are reference networks that we care about, and I'd love to see the industry look more in terms of who are the people that could be influential in this person's life. What are they people on their same block? Are they in the same building? Is it possible that they're just in the same zip code, or is it about socioeconomic status and people with this much wealth? I'm not sure what the answer is, but I do think that reference networks could hold a really powerful key if they could be harnessed properly.
So how do you think about social proof and reference networks when you think about your own personal progress? There's this sort of anecdotal idea that you're sort of the sum of the 5 people you spend time with, and that gets tossed around, and there's certainly some evidence, right, in the literature to show that if you're trying to lose weight, people who hang out with other people who are losing weight tended to lose weight. People who hang out with people who are gaining weight tend to gain weight. These reference networks, we know they're powerful. So that's sort of exhibit A. Exhibit B, though, is that it seems a little gross to me personally to sort of manage my friendships and my social ties in a way that says, well, I got to surround myself with, skinny rich people or something. So, how do we balance the reality of social proof without being so, I don't know, transactional in the way that we think about our personal relationships.
Yeah, on a personal basis, I'd go back to intentionality. That it does actually make sense to be intentional. I think where you live, and if you have a choice as to where you live, if you've got some flexibility to make that decision, then choosing the not just the neighborhood. I mean, a lot of people with young, when couples have young children, or parents have young children, that they care about school districts, and those are really important decisions. And I think it's we have to kind of use this intentionality to get beyond just, does the school have a good reputation, but what's the community like? Are the people the kind of people that we want to either worship with, or exercise with, or go to coffee with, and those kinds of things. I don't think it's so. I'd like to make it less transactional, because I think these can be longer term solutions, or have certainly longer term impact on us. And so once we make that decision, we start to create our own context and our own environment within those decisions. But to some degree, we have to be a little bit calculable about what we want, and to kind of go after that. So I don't know. It's complex. I guess that's the story. It's complex.
Yeah, it's a good. That's a good way to think about most human behavior. It's complex. I've seen, having moved from one neighborhood to another, I've seen that it has a material impact on the way that I think about my success or lack of success. Having moved from a relatively modest neighborhood to a more affluent neighborhood, you get a new reference class. And even though my financial situation hasn't changed substantially from one move to the next, my reference class has changed substantially, and it matters. I think for me, working in finance is a little disorienting when you hang out with people who are, routinely hang out and share a stage with people who are centimillionaires or billionaires. You start to look at yourself and go, oh, like what have I done with my life? So I do think, right. Personally, I do think reference class matters. And I think it cuts both ways, right? You want to hang out with people who are in some respects aspirational and will sort of induce you to make better decisions. But I think you have to be careful too about putting yourself, in the company of people that aren't going to make you feel bad about yourself as well.
Yeah, it's tricky. There was a wonderful study done at Carnegie Mellon University. I don't remember the researcher right now, looking at purchases of women's shoes, and noticed that women from relatively low socioeconomic zip codes tended to buy fewer high heels and more sort of flats or more sensible shoes, for that matter, than women in higher socioeconomic zip codes. However, when women from lower socioeconomic zip codes moved into higher socioeconomic zip codes, they started buying more high heels. And interestingly enough, when the opposite happened, when the higher socioeconomic zip code women moved into lower they kept buying high heels. Like they wanted to differentiate themselves from so there's kind of both things, right? There's this reference network can kind of work both ways. When you're moving from Sam's Club to Country Club, then you kind of want to be like them. But when you're moving from Country Club to Sam's Club, there's sort of this, no, I'm still Country Club, get away from me.
Right. That's a fascinating bit of research, right? So one group's using it to evidence belonging, and the other group is using it to evidence differentiation, right?
Exactly.
It's like, look, I don't belong here. Like I'm still Country Club. That's fascinating. So the last piece is T, which is of course timely. Talk to us about timely. How do we make our behavioral interventions timely?
There's so much that's being done or said or written about this idea, like of having smart watches, and we've got phones with us that can be activated constantly to remind us to do things, and there certainly is a market for that. for that level of timeliness. That if you benefit, if you're the kind of person that is responsive to that, then I think that it's great to think about, if you know that at 3:00 you're likely to go for the candy bar in the fridge or in the pantry. First of all, don't buy the damn things. Don't bring them home, of course. But if you're tempted by that, put the reminder on your phone at 3:00 to go for a walk. If you can get out and do something different, that's great. If you can think about your life that way. But timeliness has a more general effect that, again, kind of getting back to generations and getting back to where you're at in your life stages, that especially in finance, it doesn't make it. It won't make sense to a 21-year-old to think about huge savings, unless it's made for the end of their career, for the end of their work life, unless it's made relevant to them as a 20-year-old. I love the study that Dan Gilbert did on people who were 20 years old and 29-year-olds, and he asked the 20-year-olds what they could anticipate changing in their lives between now and 29. And they came up with a pretty good list. I'm going to graduate from college. I'm going to get married. My job, blah, blah, blah. 29-year-olds, he said, so how would you do? How good were you at anticipating changes? And they're like, no way. There were so many more changes in my life that I absolutely did not anticipate. And there's something kind of intuitive about that, but I love that Gilbert replicated that with 60-year-olds and 69-year-olds. And the 60-year-old said, I got this wired. I know what's happening. I'm going to retire at 65. I'm going to be moving, blah, blah, blah. I know I can anticipate very much of what I'm going to be doing when I'm 69. And the 69-year-olds came back and said, no way did I know what was going on in my life at 60 years old. So many more things changed. And to me, that's a clue that it's hard for us to anticipate, this unscripted future. But if marketers are able to understand where people are at in that time that they're in, not in an anticipatory mode, but just where they're at with the defaults, with what their behaviors are, I think that they can help people make better decisions if they present more relevant framing to the messaging.
Yeah. So I'm working on a little side project right now for a presentation I'll be doing at work. And it's all about sort of pitting Erickson's developmental stages against sort of a financial planning framework, right? This is something we're going to be doing because at different points in people's lives, people have different concerns, they have different developmental needs, and we want to be able to talk to our clients about that. But, if you think about, again, we'll take it to my world here. The average financial advisor is, I think, like a 59-year-old white man. Like, he's going to have different concerns than perhaps the person he's sitting across the desk from. And we need to keep this timeliness factor in mind so that we're just not always seeing the world through our own lens of timeliness, but thinking about what might be timely, what might be salient or top of mind for the person we're seeking to serve.
Oh, that's such a great point, Daniel. I think about the number of business leaders, especially the more senior people in organizations. Tremendous percentage of them have MBAs. And yet the people that they are serving, that are downstream from them in the organization, many of them do not have MBAs, and there's still a large percentage of people in corporate America and in the corporate working world around the world that do not have college degrees. Yeah. And when you think about communication, you have to get outside of yourself, and you have to think about your constituents in a much more specific and real way. And I think timeliness connects back to that as well. I also just want to say I love the idea that you can actually have a side gig on your job to present something at work. I love that.
Oh, no. It was, when I say side gig, I would say I'm working on it for work, but I haven't figured it all out. I didn't want you to ask me all about Erickson's developmental stages. I'm just starting. I'm just starting, but I do think there's something there. And, in that timeliness, there's a bit of empathy, right? There's a bit of empathy and learning to take someone else's perspective into account. So, Tim, one of the things that I loved about spending some time on your site, and I hope that's something some of the listeners will do, you have some cool case studies on there. And I think some of these ideas can feel very, ethereal. They can be hard to get your arms around. If you don't mind, if you could just take a minute and share a case study with us from your own work that takes these concepts and puts them together to solve a practical problem, so people can see how putting some of these concepts together can serve a practical business end.
Thanks for asking that, Daniel, because I loved doing a project recently with a Swiss seed and company through their U.S. operations. And they have seen over the past 20 years the problems with chemicals the chemical in Roundup specifically, that was unbelievable at killing weeds and allowing crops to grow for a while. And then guess what? The weeds actually started to figure it out. Like the weeds started to become unresponsive to the chemicals. And that put the industry in a real quagmire. Like, what are we doing here? And this organization that I worked with said, well, let's try to develop more responsible, long-term, sustainable farming methods that farmers can use that are less reliant on these particular sets of chemicals. So they had a very practical application, and the map of resistant seeds has been growing in the United States, largely growing from the South, where there's larger growing seasons, into the North, where there's shorter growing seasons. And so we developed a workshop. We'll call it a workshop, where farmers in northern communities, and by the way, we did these with groups of like 10 or 12 people, not even a whole county's worth of farmers, but just very, very small groups of community farmers, so that they all knew each other. And we split them into two groups. After a presentation about the anticipated time that it would take for these resistant weeds to reach their community, then we had one group say, okay, what do we really think answer the question, how long do you think it's going to take for these resistant weeds to reach you? And the other group was set to answer the question, what do you want your farm to look like in 5 years or 10 years? And guess what? These are mostly white men, mostly in their 50s, a lot of them thinking about retirement and legacy issues. And they had very opposite views of the world. Then they presented to each other. The group that was imagining their future said, we want pristine farms. We want farms that are going to be lasting for the next 100 years. Mm-hmm. We need sustainable farming. And the group that presented on the resistant weeds said, wait a minute, we're not going to make it. We have to do something right now, because these resistant weeds are coming in the next couple of years. We're going to be overrun. And they solved this huge problem together this was sort of an IKEA effect experience, where they actually just talked to each other and came to the conclusion that they needed to adopt new farming methods. And the adoption, and then we gave them a choice of a variety of different levels of commitment to sustainable farming. 100%. This is the most amazing result I've ever seen, is that in every city that we did this, in every town hall that we did this, 100% of the farmers committed to the most aggressive, adopting the most aggressive sustainable farming methods, that they were all committed to it. And it's just because they talked to each other, they came to the realization that the situation was terrible, and they could see a path forward to actually get out of it. And so I'm really, really proud of that work, that it helped positively influence the food that we're going to be eating in coming years, actually.
No, that's huge. And I think it illustrates, I think behavioral science is routinely applied in finance and in terms of health outcomes. And I think we're seeing more and more of that. But it's neat to hear about a behavioral application to farming, of all things. This is not, I think, where we typically think about it. Talk to us, break down some of the behavioral complexity underneath this intervention. I mean, was there sort of a robber's cave element to this of getting the That's maybe a little psych esoterica for people, but getting two seemingly conflicting groups to work towards a superordinal goal.
Yeah, it was definitely that. And of course, they all are aware of each other. And some of them, their farms are literally adjacent to each other. They're across the street, or they're separated only by a fence. And so they care about the kind of chemicals that each other is using, because the recent research has indicated that blowing winds can cause chemicals to flow from one field to the next. So it's a serious issue. So there is a certain aspect of competitiveness and cooperativeness as well. And they were willing to serve the superordinate goal of sustainable farming for their whole area, to kind of take some of the stress off of, oh man, I'm not going to have to worry about my neighbor doing something stupid that's going to impact me negatively. So there was that. But they're doing it. It revealed a deep motivation for people who have been in farming. My God, it's a really hard business to be in. Mm-hmm. To imagine that you have millions of dollars invested in technology that might be completely worthless because of the weather.
Yeah,
something completely beyond your control. So they need to act conservatively. They need to be thoughtful about what they do, and they do it because they love it. Not because it's a get-rich-quick scheme.
Right.
And it's really cool to see how they tapped into some very deep motivations. We actually, so if we were to use yeast, we made it easy for them just to have the conversation. We brought them together. We gave them pizza, and they were fine with that. There was something attractive about it because it connected to these deep motivations. It was social because they saw everyone else at these tables doing the same thing.
Right.
And so the timeliness is tricky because these issues keep moving geographically. So hitting them in a time when it felt like there was some prescience about the oncoming onslaught of resistant weeds, that seemed to be important as well. So I could easily frame it from the easy, attractive, social, and timely.
Beautiful. Well, you're doing incredible work. We're all going to thank you when we're sitting around our dinner tables eating food 10, 15 years from now. Thank you to the farmers. Thank you to Tim for helping think through this. Tim, if people want to learn more about your work, if they want to read some of these case studies or listen to your podcast, where can we find your work?
BehaviorAlchemy, which is one word, BehaviorAlchemy, is my consulting website, and would love to hear from people about if they've got specific interventions or issues that they're tackling. And if you just want sort of the free listen to great experts talk, then Behavioral Grooves. Behavioral Grooves, that's the U.S. spelling of behavioral, by the way, is our podcast. We're coming up on 300 episodes and listeners in more than 170 countries, and we're doing this weekly podcast that we just love sharing the great insights of people from around the world who have thoughtful ideas from a behavioral science perspective, including Mr. Daniel Crosby.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Well, you're doing incredible work. I just ran some stats on my own podcast the other day for as part of an award nomination. I'm creeping on 200 episodes. I think this will probably be episode 203 or 204 or something.
Wow.
So I'll hit 200 episodes soon, and I'm at 142 countries. So you've got me beat, sir. But I'm gaining on you now. It's wonderful. You and your partner have also cultivated an incredible community of behavioral thinkers, and I'm deeply grateful to you both for that. It's been wonderful to connect with other behavioral science practitioners around the world, thanks to your leadership. So thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for all you shared with the listeners today.
It's my pleasure. Great to be here, Daniel.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.